In our headlines on this Thursday, November 6th, here in South Korea, the U.S. Supreme Court appears concerned Wednesday with the Trump administration's claim of unlimited tariff authority over America's trade partners as related hearings kick off. Meanwhile, here in South Korea, lawmakers across the aisle lock horns over the government's budget proposal for next year, taking issue with spending size and fiscal direction. And North Korea accuses the U.S. of continued hostility in response to the latter's recent sanctions against the regime, which adds it will respond with strategic patience. A legal battle currently underway at the U.S. Supreme Court may change the course of the Trump administration's tariff campaign against America's trade partners, including South Korea. Our Lee Seung-jae explains.
The U.S. Supreme Court began hearings on Wednesday to decide whether President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on South Korea and other nations were legally justified. At the center of the case is whether Trump exceeded his presidential authority when he used tariffs as a central tool of his economic and foreign policy.
The power to impose tariffs is a core application of the power to regulate foreign commerce, which is what the phrase regulate importation in IEEPA naturally evokes.
Justices met at the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. to hear arguments from attorneys representing small businesses and 12 Democratic-leaning states that filed the lawsuit, as well as from government lawyers defending Trump's policy.
It's simply implausible that in enacting IEEPA, Congress handed the president the power to overhaul the entire tariff system and the American economy in the process, allowing him to set and reset tariffs on any and every product from any and every country at any and all times.
Lower courts, including the U.S. Court of International Trade and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, had already ruled that Trump's global tariffs imposed using emergency powers were unlawful. The Supreme Court, now holding a 6-3 conservative majority, has in the past issued rulings favorable to Trump, but legal experts say the outcome of this case remains uncertain. The central issue is whether Trump's reliance on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which allows a president to regulate imports in response to a declared national emergency, provided a legitimate legal basis for his tariffs. On April 2nd, Trump declared an emergency, claiming that America's chronic trade deficits were a threat to national security and the economy. He then announced plans to impose so-called reciprocal tariffs on multiple foreign nations. During Wednesday's session, a majority of the justices appeared skeptical about the president's power to unilaterally impose such far-reaching tariffs. 3 conservative justices raised concerns about whether an emergency law could give Trump near limitless power to change import duties and affect global trade. The court's 3 liberal justices also voiced doubts, meaning that at least 2 conservative votes could move to limit Trump's authority, though not necessarily strike it down completely. Legal analysts say the decision in this case could redefine the scope of presidential authority in trade policy for years to come. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And speaking of trade, but here in South Korea, steady exports of semiconductors kept the country's current account in the black in September for the 29th month in a row. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers the latest numbers.
South Korea's current account surplus continued for the 29th month straight in September, driven by strong exports. The Bank of Korea announced Thursday that the preliminary current account surplus registered for the month stood at $13.47 billion, the largest for any previous September. This is also second highest monthly surplus for any month since the year 2000, and considering the surplus this year from January to September, it's the highest ever for the period, with $82.77 billion, about 23% higher than the same period last year.
The biggest factor here is the boom in semiconductor exports, as the industry has entered a super cycle. In non-IT items, while automobile exports to the U.S. have declined, the sector is performing well, supported by export diversification to Europe and other regions.
According to officials, this figure in September was driven by a $14.24 billion surplus in the goods account. Exports rose 9.6% from the previous year, while imports increased by 4.5%. Compared to the month before, it's up $4.84 billion. However, the services account deficit widened to $3.32 billion, larger than the previous month and the same month last year. This was partly because the transport balance swung to a deficit for the first time in 5 months. Looking ahead, the central bank expects the surplus to shrink in October due to fewer working days from the Chuseok holiday, but forecasts a return to a strong surplus trend for November and December. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, at the Parliament, the government's budget proposal for next year is under scrutiny, with rival lawmakers clashing over spending size and fiscal direction. Our National Assembly correspondent Moon Hae-ryan has the latest.
Ruling and opposition lawmakers held a comprehensive policy inquiry into South Korea's largest ever budget proposal on Thursday, sparring over its overall scale and spending priorities. Prime Minister Kim Woosung and Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol opened the session with remarks outlining the government's position on the 728 trillion won budget for 2026. Kim stressed the need for proactive fiscal measures to support growth and recovery, particularly in people's daily lives, while also addressing concerns over long-term fiscal sustainability.
In drawing up this year's budget, the government carried out a record 27 trillion won expenditure restructuring and prepared a range of measures to ensure fiscal sustainability.
He said the budget centers on 3 areas: building an innovative economy, strengthening the social foundation so all citizens can grow together, and bolstering national security and diplomacy with a focus on public safety and the national interest. Koo added remarks on the urgency of the situation and asked lawmakers to process the bill before the December 2nd deadline.
If key projects like developing advanced industries, reviving local economies, and easing household burdens are not carried out on time, the 728 trillion won budget cannot deliver its full impact.
The ruling Democratic Party echoed the government's view, arguing that the proposal puts meaningful resources toward cultivating long-term growth engines. But the main opposition, People Power Party, warned that expanding spending could undermine fiscal soundness. One PPP lawmaker also criticized the government's tariff agreement with the United States, which includes a $350 billion investment package, noting that National Assembly approval is required when policies impose a heavy financial burden on the state or the public. A DP lawmaker, meanwhile, pointed to rising domestic demand, improving consumer sentiment, and gains in the stock market as evidence of the Lee administration's economic achievements and justification for its expansionary fiscal approach. The policy inquiry continues Friday, with full deliberations for each government ministry set to begin next week. Moon Hae-ryan, Arirang News.
At the APEC CEO Summit in Gyeongju last week, NVIDIA pledged 260,000 GPUs for South Korea. So what are the implications of this investment for the country? Our business correspondent Park Jun-han takes a look.
With a supply of 260,000 NVIDIA GPUs, South Korea has the capacity to become one of the world's top 3 AI countries. This is what Presidential Senior Secretary for AI and Future Planning Ha Jung-woo said last Friday, the day the government and industrial giants announced a GPU supply deal with the world's most advanced chipmaker. Although it might seem impressive to hold hundreds of thousands of GPUs, it's natural to wonder what this number actually signifies and what they will be used for.
Artificial intelligence, from large language models to physical AI, demands tremendous computing power for training, which is why the NVIDIA GPUs will play a critical role. With 260,000 secured, South Korea now ranks among the global top 3, positioning us not just to build AI models, but to develop core AI technologies that drive innovation across industries.
A professor here also claims that early access to chips from NVIDIA, which dominates 90% of the advanced semiconductor market, marks a significant milestone, positioning South Korea to gain a competitive edge.
Since NVIDIA holds nearly 90% of the global GPU market, high-performance GPUs, essential for advanced physical robots, can realistically only be sourced from NVIDIA. With tens of thousands of GPUs operating like supercomputers, data centers are being built to support large-scale AI training. As more of these systems are established, we expect South Korea's AI ecosystem to grow exponentially.
Securing high-performance GPUs is certainly encouraging, but how they are used, for what purposes, and how effectively they are allocated may prove just as crucial as obtaining the chips themselves. This will be a key factor shaping South Korea's future with AI. Park Junan, Arirang News.
North Korea has accused the U.S. of unrelenting hostility in light of the latter's most recent sanctions against the regime. Our An Sung-jin reports.
North Korea said it will respond with strategic patience to what it calls Washington's unchanged hostility following the recent sanctions. According to its state media Korean Central News Agency on Thursday, Kim Woosung, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of U.S. affairs, issued a statement that reiterated Pyongyang's position against what it called the deep-rooted hostility toward our state from the current U.S. administration. Kim added that the latest round of sanctions is the fifth unilateral sanctions package since the Trump administration took office, and denounced the U.S. for asserting pressure and coercion, which will have no impact on the North's position toward Washington. This comes as the U.S. Treasury Department announced this week new sanctions on individuals and institutions allegedly involved in laundering illicit funds from cybercrime operations to fund the North's weapons program. The State Department had also stated that it plans to pursue UN sanctions against foreign ships accused of helping transport North Korean coal and iron ore exports to China. Despite Trump's interest in reviving talks with Kim Jong-un, as the sanctions continue, Pyongyang's choice of strategic patience may suggest a sharp rhetoric and a renewed hardline approach. On the U.S. perspective, analysts say that the latest sanctions may signal stronger pressure on the regime after U.S.-North Korea talks failed to materialize during Trump's recent visit to Asia. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Staying on the international front, the U.S. launched an intercontinental ballistic missile back on Wednesday, while on the same day, Russia looked to its prospects of resuming nuclear weapons testing. Our defense correspondent Kim Woosung has details.
Just 6 days after President Donald Trump urged the U.S. military to restart nuclear weapons testing, the U.S. on Wednesday fired a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile. According to the Air Force Global Strike Command, the unarmed nuclear-capable missile was launched from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. The rocket traveled around 6,860 kilometers, landing near the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site in the Marshall Islands. This follows after Trump announced on social media just 1 hour before holding a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping on October 30th that he instructed the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing. He did, however, hint at working on a joint denuclearization plan with Russia and China.
We did our nuclear. We're the #1 nuclear power, which I hate to admit because it's so horrible. We're maybe working on a plan to denuclearize the three of us, so we'll see if that works.
His remarks came during a Miami business forum and amid growing concerns about nuclear proliferation and strategic competition between the world's leading powers. No specific plan or details came out from the White House regarding his comments, though. Meanwhile, responding to the U.S., Russian President Vladimir Putin on the same day on Wednesday ordered his top officials to submit proposals on possible nuclear weapons testing. In a televised meeting with his Security Council, he said Moscow had always strictly adhered to the obligations not to do any tests, but it would do so if any other nuclear power had started.
Russia has always strictly adhered to its obligations under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and we have no plans to withdraw from it. At the same time, as I stated in my address to the Federal Assembly in 2023, should the United States or other treaty signatories conduct such tests, Russia would be compelled to take appropriate reciprocal measures.
Russian Defense Minister told Putin that Washington's recent remarks clearly demonstrate active buildup of strategic offensive weapons, with the Chief of the General Staff adding Russia should respond effectively to such actions. To this, Putin asked all the ministries and relevant agencies to do everything necessary to collect additional information on this issue, analyze it, and draft proposals. Kim Woosung, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, South Korea's #1 beauty firm by market capitalization, APR, the owner of Medicube, has recorded its highest ever quarterly performance. The firm's consolidated sales for the third quarter hit 385.9 billion won, or some $267 million, up over 120% on year. Operating profit soared by over 252% on year to stand at over 96 billion won. The stellar performance was driven by a phenomenal surge in overseas sales, which now account for 80% of the company's total revenue. In fact, despite the presence of tariffs, sales to the U.S. market skyrocketed 280%. In other news, the Environment Ministry has updated its target goal for South Korea's greenhouse gas reduction. During a public hearing at the Parliament on this Thursday, the ministry proposed cutting emissions by either 50 to 60% or 53 to 60% compared to 2018 levels by 2035, a significant shift from the current target of a 40% reduction by 2030. The final decision will be made by the Presidential Commission on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth and the Cabinet next week, before submission to the UN the following week. Under the Paris Agreement, all signatory nations are required to establish and submit updated targets every 5 years. Curtains have gone down on this year's APEC Forum in Gyeongju, but the historic city is maintaining its efforts to engage foreign visitors to the beauty of Korea's heritage. Our Cha Yun-kyung has a glimpse.
This is Ohan House, an exhibition space located in the K-Business Square at the Gyeongju Expo Grand Park. Here, visitors can experience 5 elements of traditional Korean culture: Hansik, or Korean cuisine; Hangul, the Korean alphabet; Hanji, traditional paper; Hanbok, clothing; and Hanok, a traditional house. Forum visitors can use AI to draw Korean traditional paintings or practice writing their English names in Hangul. Although Korean culture may feel unfamiliar to them, it is perceived as something as innovative and refreshing as cutting-edge technology.
Yeah, it gave us an idea that how Korea has, or what are the different 5 pillars of the Korean culture. So, very nice. Very happy to be here.
They can practice traditional calligraphy and enjoy pansori, or Korean folk music performances. These unique Korean cultural experiences provided a refreshing break from their hectic schedules and allowed them to relax. Captivated by the charm of Korean traditions, foreign visitors went to Gyeongju's Gyochon Hanok village. There, they explored tiled roof houses lined with stone walls, experiencing the essence of Korean heritage.
It's very traditional, but also incredibly beautiful. I think for me, I really enjoyed the food is amazing and very varied. Also, I think the people here are very friendly and welcoming.
The Ohan House will reopen from November 10th until the 23rd after a revision, welcoming visitors every day from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
And Arirang TV's video journalist Kim Woosung received the award for news at the 2025 Hinzpeter Awards here in Seoul on Wednesday for his report Midnight Martial Law. Now, he accepted the award on behalf of 48 fellow journalists for covering the tense events at the National Assembly after former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration in December. Established in 2021, the Hinzpeter Awards commemorate German journalist Wilhelm Hinzpeter, who broke the story of the Gwangju movement in May 1980.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In New York City on Tuesday night, Democrat Zohran Mamdani won a decisive victory over former governor of New York State Andrew Cuomo to become the city's first Muslim mayor. With 97% of votes counted, he led by more than 8 points. Speaking in Brooklyn, Mamdani called New York a, quote, light in a moment of political darkness, and sent a direct message to the president, quote, turn the volume up. Within minutes, Donald Trump fired back on Truth Social, branding Mamdani's victory, quote, communism over common sense, and warning that Democrats were pushing America too far left. The win cements a strong night for Democrats nationwide. Mamdani will take office in January as New York's 111th mayor. Focus now turns to how his progressive agenda, including rent freezes and an increase in corporation tax, will unfold under a Trump presidency. In the United States, at least 11 people were killed when a plane crashed and exploded on Tuesday evening in Louisville, Kentucky. Authorities say the UPS cargo plane's left engine caught fire and detached during takeoff from Louisville Muhammad Ali International Airport, sending the plane crashing into nearby buildings and triggering a massive fireball. According to officials, at least a dozen people were injured and more victims are feared as the search continues for missing people. Officials also say the crash caused a blaze so intense that parts of the city were briefly placed under a shelter-in-place order. Investigators have recovered the plane's black boxes and are examining footage showing the engine falling from the wing moments before impact to determine what caused one of the state's deadliest aviation disasters. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, at least 11 people have been killed and around 30 injured after a fire broke out at a retirement home in the city of Tuzla, about 80 kilometers northeast of Sarajevo on Tuesday evening. Authorities say the blaze started on the 7th floor of the building and took an hour to bring under control. Local media report that many of the victims were elderly or bedridden, unable to escape as flames and smoke filled the upper floors. Officials are still investigating the cause, and the home's director has offered his resignation, calling the tragedy, quote, a heartbreak for the entire country. The brightest supermoon of 2025 illuminated skies around the world on November 5th. Also known as the Beaver Moon, the spectacle appeared up to 14% larger and 30% brighter than usual, bright enough to cast shadows under its light. Astronomers say the moon reached its closest point to Earth, about 357,000 kilometers away, just hours after turning full, marking the biggest and brightest of the 3 supermoons that appeared this year. Skywatchers in both hemispheres enjoy the show, while a live stream from Italy's virtual telescope project captured the moment for millions online. The next supermoon is set to rise on Thursday, December the 4th. 주지현, 아리랑 뉴스.
As the clear and chilly late autumn weather continues, uninvited ultrafine dust is expected to fill the air overnight. From late afternoon, ultrafine dust gradually moved in from overseas, with higher concentration in the western areas. This dusty air will stay until tomorrow morning and gradually fade as easterly winds clear the air in the afternoon. The daily temperature range continues to be wide today, in particular as daytime temperatures far exceeded the previous year's levels. The daily temperature difference from the morning has widened to more than 10 degrees Celsius in Seoul. Temperature swings will appear across the country for the time being. Seoul will start off at 9 degrees tomorrow morning, Daegu and Gyeongju at 8 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to 20 degrees in Seoul and Daejeon, 22 degrees in Jeju. More rain is forecast from Friday to Sunday across the country. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.